Have you ever had a gut feeling that something just wasn't right about a person? Maybe it was the way they smiled a little too confidently, or how their words seemed to always leave a lingering sense of unease. As someone who has worked closely with people in some of the most vulnerable states, I've encountered individuals who tested my professional boundaries and my instincts. Some of these people were master manipulators, sociopaths, or worse, and they showed me a side of human behavior I wasn't prepared for. But let me tell you, there's one patient, one situation, that still haunts me to this day. The things this person did, the games they played, and how they slipped under my radar at first, left me questioning everything I thought I knew about human nature. This story is about the time I realized I wasn't just dealing with someone who had a mental health issue. No, I was dealing with someone who was calculating, cold, and dangerous. Stay with me as I take you through this chilling journey, and by the end of it, you'll understand how sometimes the scariest part of being a therapist isn't the diagnoses, it's realizing who you're really treating. I've always believed that love was supposed to feel like safety, like being home. But what if your home is the thing that burns you down? My name is Callie. I'm 29, a freelance designer living in Seattle, and this is the story of how I married a man I thought I knew until one confession destroyed everything. We met at a startup networking event. He was charming in a way that didn't try too hard, just confident, direct, a little mysterious. His name was Nathan. A software engineer, quiet but intense. He asked questions that made me feel seen, not just heard. It felt rare. It felt real. Our first dates blurred into late nights, long talks, him making coffee exactly how I liked it, his hand brushing my lower back just enough to feel like a promise. I fell fast. And hard. By 6 months, we moved in together. At a year, we were married in a courthouse ceremony, just us, 2 witnesses, and a rush of finally. I never imagined what came next would leave me questioning everything, my marriage, my sanity, and whether the man beside me was even real. The first crack came 2 months after our wedding. I was organizing a drawer in Nathan's office when I found an envelope buried under tax forms. Inside were photos. Dozens. Some printed, some Polaroids. They were of me. Not just recent ones. Some were years old, me walking into my old college dorm, at a bar with friends, asleep in my childhood bedroom. I felt my blood run cold. When I confronted Nathan, he didn't deny it. Instead, he said something that still echoes in my head. I've always loved you. Before you ever knew me. He told me he'd seen me for the first time 6 years ago, walking out of a bookstore. Something about me called to him, he said. So he found out where I worked. Where I lived. Who I dated. He'd watched me fall in and out of love. He'd even been at some of the same events, accidentally. He said it wasn't stalking. He said it was fate. I left that night. Slept at my sister's. But I didn't leave him. I wish I could tell you why. Maybe it was fear. Maybe hope. Maybe the part of me that wanted to believe love could be obsessive and still be love. Nathan apologized for days. Said he needed therapy. Said he'd only kept the photos because he never thought he'd actually have me, and once he did, he couldn't let go of the story. He deleted them. In front of me. We started couples counseling. I told myself that love is messy. That people do strange things when they're lonely. For a while, it worked. He was attentive. Supportive. He brought me lunch while I worked, cooked dinner when I was on deadlines. But then, my passwords stopped working. My emails showed as read before I opened them. My location sharing would turn on, then off, without me doing anything. One night, I came home to find my phone unlocked, placed screen up on the table. I hadn't left it that way. Nathan said I was being paranoid. Why would I spy on you if you live with me? But I knew. And yet, I stayed. Because by then, he had rewritten my reality so subtly that I questioned my own instincts. Things escalated after I started freelancing for a new client, Jonah. Jonah was kind. Married. Professional. But Nathan hated him from the moment I mentioned his name. You smile when you talk about him, Nathan said once. I smile when I talk about good people, I replied. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. Neither did I. The next morning, Jonah emailed me, "Hey, did you mean to share that doc with me?" Attached was a file from my drive, one I hadn't touched. Inside were screenshots of private messages between me and Jonah, most of them edited to look flirtatious. I was mortified. Confused. I checked my sharing history. The file had been accessed from my laptop. While I was asleep. I confronted Nathan, shaking. He looked at me with genuine confusion. Maybe someone hacked you. I laughed. That wild, hollow kind of laugh when you realize something truly horrifying. You're married to a stranger. The day I decided to leave was quiet. Too quiet. I had been planning it in secret, slowly backing up files, changing passwords, transferring money. I thought I was being careful. I wasn't careful enough. Nathan came home early. Saw the duffel bag. Saw the look on my face. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat down on the couch and said, "I knew you'd try to leave. They always do." They. My heart stopped. Who's they? I asked. He smiled. Like it was a game. Like this was just the next level. The next day, I felt like a puppet on invisible strings. Something in me knew I should pack up and leave, but I stayed. She was warm again, touching my hand when I passed her tea, whispering thank you when I did simple things like take out the trash. She'd switch back to that wide-eyed innocence. I'm trying, really. I just have these thoughts sometimes. I told myself, she's been through trauma. She's healing. Be patient. But then I noticed my keys were missing. Again. She found them in the freezer. Laughing. Like it was a game. Her eyes watched me too closely while I smiled back, confused and chilled to my core. That night, I pretended to be asleep. Around 2:13 a.m., I felt her sit on the edge of the bed. I kept my breathing slow and steady. She hovered, whispering something I couldn't quite make out until she leaned in closer to my ear. Sometimes I wonder what your face would look like if you stopped breathing. I felt my stomach drop. But I didn't flinch. Didn't move. I just stayed still. Frozen. Like prey. The next morning, she made pancakes. She kissed my cheek. She called me my light. It was like the night before hadn't happened. When I brought it up, her face twisted. You're accusing me of threatening you? You don't trust me at all, do you? She cried. She cried so hard she hyperventilated. I panicked and tried to hold her. But then, mid-sob, she stopped. Dead silence. Then she said, flat and cold. You should sleep somewhere else tonight. No anger. Just instructions. I started documenting everything. Screenshots. Audio notes. I didn't know why. Maybe I was scared for my safety, maybe for someone else's. She had started talking about her coworker. Said she deserved to be punished. I asked why. She lied to me, she said, without blinking. That kind of betrayal deserves something biblical. I felt the back of my neck go cold. That night, I slept with a chair propped against the bedroom door. 2 days later, her coworker was in the hospital. Accident, she said. But I saw the glimmer in her eye when she told me. I asked if she was okay. She said, I didn't do anything. I just gave the universe a little push. I couldn't breathe. I looked at her and realized this wasn't trauma. This wasn't a broken person trying to heal. This was someone who studied people like puzzles. And took joy in pulling pieces apart. I watched her face twist ever so slightly when I asked about her past relationships, just a flicker of disdain, too fast for most to catch. She spoke of her ex-husband as if describing a failed business transaction he didn't deliver. So I moved on. No grief. No sorrow. Just data. She smiled politely after, as if she hadn't just referred to a 10-year marriage like a botched Amazon order. The room chilled. I noted it silently. She asked, "Do people usually cry when they talk about divorce?" I responded carefully, "Sometimes. It depends on the person." She nodded, then added, "Good." I thought I was the only one not wasting tears. That's when I began to understand. Her therapy sessions weren't about healing. They were about refining the mask. She started testing me. Not with questions, but with confessions. I hit my sister when we were kids. She still has a scar. I sometimes lie to my boss just to watch him scramble. I fantasized about crashing into a group of pedestrians once. I didn't. But the thought made me smile. Each time, she'd glance at me not for approval, but measurement. How far could she push before I blinked? And I didn't blink. Not because I wasn't horrified. But because I had to hold the role. I wasn't her friend. I was her audience. And she was the playwright. Writing a role for me to play in her little stage of manipulation. One day, she walked in wearing all white. "Do you like the color?" she asked. "Sure," I replied. White hides nothing. That's why killers in movies wear it. Because they don't need to hide. Then she said, "If I told you I hurt someone really hurt them, would you have to report it?" I kept my voice calm. "That depends. Is someone in danger?" She smiled. "No. Not anymore." And with that, she changed the subject to yoga, of all things. That entire conversation wasn't a confession. It was leverage. A breadcrumb to test boundaries. I knew then. She didn't need help. She needed control. There were moments, brief and jarring, where she'd cry. But not from pain. From inconvenience. Once, she broke down because a man she seduced ghosted her. Not because she loved him, but because he dared to ignore her. She sobbed, "How could he disappear like that? Doesn't he know what I gave him?" And what was that? Manipulation wrapped in sex. A tool used, not a connection felt. But the tears weren't fake. They were real. Only not for him. For her ego. For her wounded pride. The predator doesn't cry for the prey. It cries for its own hunger. I made a mistake. I once said, "It seems like you struggle with empathy." She went silent for a full minute. When she looked up, something behind her eyes was gone. "You're not supposed to say things like that," she said. "I'm here to help," I replied. She smiled. But not the warm kind. The kind that said, "Game on." After that, she became charming. Too charming. Every session was praise. Flattery. And then, slips. Mentions of private things she shouldn't know about me. Details she could only get by digging. Googling. Watching. That's when I realized. She wasn't here for therapy. She was studying me. Therapist became subject. She flipped the frame. She ended therapy abruptly. One week, she simply said, "I've learned everything I needed." I asked, "Anything else you'd like to explore?" She looked at me, head tilted. "No. But I do hope you're careful. Not everyone who smiles at you wants to be healed." Then she walked out. No goodbye. No closure. Just silence. I stared at the empty chair. And for the first time in my career, I locked the door behind a patient. Not for confidentiality. But for safety. Weeks passed. Then months. He stopped coming to therapy altogether, and we couldn't reach him. At first, I assumed he'd ghosted treatment like many before. But something about his disappearance itched at me. A week later, I got a call from a former parole officer. He had violated conditions again. Not minor ones. This time it involved another woman, threats, manipulation, and a fire. A literal fire. Apparently, he'd torched part of an ex's property after she tried to cut off contact. No one was hurt, but the destruction was extensive. The woman told the police he'd used subtle threats for weeks, worn her down emotionally, made her feel like she owed him. She only realized how far gone she was when she watched him laugh as the flames caught. He was arrested again. And I felt, for the first time in my career, something close to relief. Because now he wasn't in my office, weaving his nets. I had to debrief with my supervisor. I sat across from her, exhausted. "You okay?" she asked, voice calm but curious. I nodded, but then I said something I hadn't admitted aloud. "I think he got to me. I think he really tried to pull me in." My supervisor didn't blink. She nodded slowly. "That's how they operate. Sociopathy isn't always about murder or violence. Sometimes, it's about erosion. Of trust. Of reality. Of self." The clinical part of me knew this. But hearing it, it hit differently. He hadn't just preyed on his partners. He'd tested his reach in the safest place he could find, therapy. A place where the rules were supposed to protect everyone. Months later, I'd moved on to other clients. But sometimes I still hear his voice in my head. Not because I miss it, but because it was a warning. It taught me that charisma is not morality. That someone can mimic kindness, rehearse empathy, even speak in therapeutic language, without believing a word of it. He once told me, "I've always wondered what it would be like to be a normal person. I think I could pull it off." And the worst part? For a while, he did. But masks always slip. Especially when the person behind them thinks the world is too stupid to notice. I kept my notes from those sessions longer than I had to. Not out of fear, out of fascination. Because I never wanted to forget what it felt like to look a sociopath in the eye and see nothing. No remorse. No empathy. Just cold strategy and a need for control. He taught me something vital. Something every therapist, and maybe every person, should understand. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it smiles. And if you're not paying attention, you'll think that smile means safety. But it doesn't. It means you're next.